Sometimes when you're working in Inkscape, you're going to come across a very complicated image. And so if we look at this little tiger, we could try to select some of these objects using this select tool, but you see that we just select the entire thing, and that's because there's actually only one layer involved here. And we could then try and start selecting the individual elements, but if you see these red previews, that's going to show you that, for example, even just this nose area is made up of two separate shapes. And then it would take you hours and hours and hours to select each one of these objects and then change the colors. So in this case, you might want to consider using the Paint Bucket tool. Now in theory, the Paint Bucket tool is great and it's supposed to work the same way that it does in GIMP. But it's got a few limitations, so you might want to seriously consider rather just saving this out as an SVG, then opening it up in GIMP and using the Paint Bucket there. I think you'll probably get much better results, but just in case, the way the Paint Bucket tool works is you just select it over here, and whatever area you click on is going to be filled with whatever is currently set to the fill and the stroke. So just to make sure you understand that, if I have a stroke color active, so if I go back to my Inkscape default, and if I set this to the stroke, I've now got this black outline, and this object was actually selected, so I'm just going to undo that. My stroke is now black and it's half transparent. If I fill an area, not only does it get the fill color, but it also gets the stroke color. And most times you won't want that, but in some circumstances that could be useful. But mostly what I would do is just set the stroke to nothing. And what you can then do is just choose a color for whatever you want to fill. So for example, we could choose something like this slightly brighter orange. So I could set the fill. And notice that whenever you fill something, that particular object remains selected. So if I decide that I want to change this color, I can double click this, but as soon as I start changing it, just remember that it's going to also change the last thing that you filled, unless you take the select tool and then deselect everything, and then you can go in and start changing colors. The real problem with this tool, however, is that it works in quite a strange way. It works based on what it can see on your screen. And the problem with that is, if I set this to my fill, I can get the Paint Bucket. And if we click here, we are going to fill this area of the tiger's face. But the problem is that if you really zoom in, you see that it's left this gap. And if we just undo, you can see that this was exactly the same color. So there's no reason why it shouldn't have filled. And if we fill again, because we now zoomed right in, it gets that area. But the problem is that now if you zoom out, you've got a little square because it's only filled as far as the screen can go. So what's basically happening is Inkscape basically fills according to what it can see on your screen. And so if you zoomed out really far, your screen doesn't have a lot of detail. So if I now fill this and zoom back in, you see you've got all these gaps that are missing. Because we were so far zoomed out, your screen couldn't really see these little pieces, and so it hasn't filled them in. Just one other thing you want to know about if you want to use this tool is the threshold. This works the same way as in GIMP. So if your threshold is 0, only colors which are exactly the same as the one you click on can get filled. If you set the threshold to something a little higher, you can see there it's filled a few more things because it's allowed a little bit more leeway. So if you want to use the Paint Bucket in Inkscape, that's how it works. Personally, I'd prefer to just open this SVG straight in GIMP and do it there because it'll work much better. And what you want to do is whichever piece of the object you want to fill, try and zoom in on it as closely as you can without getting pieces cut off by the screen. In that case, you're going to get the best sort of detail when you fill.